What is up, YouTube? This is Josh, aka Dad the Dragon Slayer, and today the labor and delivery video that we're going to do is expecting the unexpected. Through this process, you're probably going to meet a maternity navigator that's going to help you come up with a birth plan. It's funny that people even put a plan to this thing, but it eases a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety as far as going into something that you really don't know how it's going to go. A lot of people have certain music they want played. They have an idea of how long they're going to push and how long it's going to take to dilate, what that's all going to look like. They have ideas as far as like what step they want to try first, and like if that doesn't work, they want to go here. If that doesn't work, they want to go here. A lot of people have the expectation of a full, just normal vaginal delivery. And I'm just here to tell you to loosen up your expectations a little bit, because none of this is under your control. I think expectations are really important in how we perceive reality emotionally. And the last thing you want at the end of the day when you have your baby is to be disappointed in yourself and how that process went. So I'm going to share a little bit of our experience and how that went. Because it was crazy. It was very turbulent and emotional the entire time. So Sydney got diagnosed with preeclampsia, which is a pretty common thing that happens in pregnancy. They kind of had inklings about it, but then it really didn't onset fully until towards the end, or really like the last week or two. So they decided to induce, which is just they're going to give your body drugs and hormones that it would naturally produce in order to have the baby, to kind of speed that process along and make it happen when we want it to happen. That prevents just further complications down the road. So we went in on a Tuesday night, and they administered what's called Cervidil, which is a cervical ripening agent. It basically softens up the cervix. That way when those muscles in the uterus start contracting, the cervix is soft enough to start to open and dilate like it should. So that takes about 10 to 12 hours. So they placed that. We slept the night at the hospital, not too terribly comfortable, especially in a delivery bed and not like a mom-baby bed. So we woke up the next day and they started Pitocin. Pitocin is man-made oxytocin. That's the hormone that your body produces to start contractions. So we started doing that through the IV. Contractions happened. She didn't feel any of them. They were irregular. It wasn't really working. So they decided to stop at 3 p.m., let us kind of get that out of her system, eat some food, recoup, renew ourselves. But already it wasn't going to plan, as you can see. So they did another round of Cervidil that night, Wednesday night. So we stayed another night in the labor and delivery beds, which again are terrible and not comfortable at all. They're made for having babies, not for sleeping. And then the next morning they started her on Pitocin again. She still just didn't get really strong contractions, wouldn't dilate past a centimeter. So finally at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning, they decided to break her water. By the way, they're checking her cervix the whole time, and it's posterior, they keep saying. So basically, instead of like, if this is the top and this is the bottom, instead of being kind of tilted towards the top and forward, it was actually kind of tucked back up and pointed down, which isn't really ideal for the whole process. You know, you kind of want to straight as you can out of the way. So all those checks are really painful. I mean, they get in there and they dig around. Doctors are much more confident than nurses. Nurses will usually try to ease a little bit more, but when the doctor comes in and check you, she's jamming her fingers up your waha, okay? And it's not comfortable. So there's an expectation for you too. Like, this isn't a pleasant experience, really. And it's a bunch of strangers. Like, it's not very fun. Anyway, they broke her water, which was even more painful. So again, more of the experience is just very unpleasant. And she dilates from a 1 to a 3 at about 11 o'clock. So we're making progress. The contractions are coming on like they should. It's finally working out the way it's supposed to. And at 3 centimeters, they come into place for epidural. The epidural didn't go as planned either. It took 3 times the numbing agent to get her back numb, and she still felt everything, the needle going into her in between her vertebrae. She bled a lot more than she was supposed to. I think it was probably because she was really, really well hydrated. They keep you on an IV of fluids, but you're also drinking water the entire time. So she was drinking like a gallon and a half of water a day probably, plus the fluids they were pumping into her. So just like a lot of blood, more numbing agent than necessary. She felt everything, and that was just kind of a mess. So that happens, and then unfortunately we encounter some emotional distress. Her blood pressure spikes to 171. She starts kind of bawling her eyes out, and that was a terrible, terrible deal. That sapped a lot of energy out of her to the point where she just kind of laid down and took a nap. I think because of that relaxed state kind of caused what happened next. She dilated from a 3 centimeter to a 7 centimeter in about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, which is stupid fast. So that was kind of crazy. She woke up from that nap and could feel pretty much everything. She was on her side sleeping, and the epidural works by gravity. So it just wasn't where it was supposed to be as far as a numbing agent goes. So they're trying to reposition her. They're trying to sit her up, try to get that epidural medicine to go back down her spinal column into where it needs to be. And in the next 2 hours, she goes from that 7 to a 10, and we are ready to push. So it all just happened really, really fast, very unexpected. And she wasn't exactly, feeling the best because that epidural wasn't being super effective. We were basically pressing the juice button as many times as we could to try to get it to catch back up to where it needed to be. And finally, it got to where it was pretty good about the time she started pushing. Now, she pushed for about an hour and 15 minutes before the epidural really stopped doing what it was supposed to do. And she pushed for 15, and at that hour and a half mark, the doctor came in, checked out what was going on, said that basically because she had dilated so quickly that Simon's little head had dropped too fast. And because it had dropped too fast, it wasn't positioned quite right. So it was actually angled off and to the right, kind of looking up, and it's really supposed to be looking down. That's the best way to kind of get the baby's head underneath the pelvic bone and out the way it's supposed to go. So he said, with that being said, it's unlikely that we make a whole lot of progress, but if you have the energy in you and you've got it in you, let's try to push for another 30 minutes before we go to that C-section option, which she never thought in a million years she would have a C-section. She said herself, she's got hips for days, and it was our entire expectation to have a normal baby vaginally. It just made sense. And it turns out her pelvic opening was just a little bit small, and with that head dropping down weird, eventually you'll find out. So we pushed for another half hour without any pain medication, and it was the worst experience I think I've ever had in my entire life, to see the person that you love in that much pain. It was awful. It really, really was. So as awesome as a birth is, it is not a fun experience. I don't want you to think that it will be. So just put that expectation there for you too. She pushed for half an hour. It was excruciating. And finally the doctor came in and said, we're not making the progress that we need to be making. So neither of them were in distress as far as heart rate and blood pressure. They were both sustaining well, but she was in an incredible amount of pain. And we needed to get that baby moving. So they decided to do a C-section at 7 p.m. 7 p.m. is when the nurses shift change. So the delivery nurse that she had been laboring with all day Wednesday when not a whole lot was happening, but also all day Thursday when we had huge contractions, the epidural that was a mess, the emotional distress that she went through, the high blood pressure, all of that, left to go home. And because it happened at shift change, the orders weren't even put in for the C-section, so we had to wait an additional 20 to 30 minutes to get everything set up and moving. Then they get her back to the OR, and she says that they have to take out the epidural because it became ineffective and put in a spinal block. They do it the same way they do an epidural. They have you sit up with 10 centimeters dilation, sitting on our little baby Simon's head, in between her crotch, literally going through the most painful contractions and going through this, and finally they get the spinal block in and everything was okay. 45 minutes later, we've got baby, mom, happy, healthy, safe and sound. That was the first real moment that we got to relax. And it was just terrible, like the whole experience. But finally, it worked out, and finally it happened. And that's why I want to share that with you, because it's a roller coaster. It's just ridiculous. And the last thing you want at the end is to be disappointed in yourself for not being able to carry through, or yeah. The last thing you want is at the end to be disappointed in yourself because you weren't able to do what you expected yourself to do. She expected to deliver vaginally, and she was a little disappointed, but with the way the pain was, and she's a very, emotionally aware and intelligent woman, so it finally came down to, like, get this baby out. We want to be happy and healthy, safe and sound. As long as you get to from point A, which is you're pregnant, really, really pregnant, to point B, which is you have an infant, everybody's happy and safe and sound and healthy. As long as you get that, you won. Like, all this middle stuff, don't worry about it. It's okay. Whatever it takes to get to point B, it doesn't matter. Whatever that is, you've got it. You can do it. Try not to put those expectations on yourself. Just know that as long as you get here, you did it. That's a success. It's a huge win. It's amazing. It's awesome. And you did it. No matter how difficult, how it happens, what has to happen, anything like that. Even if you do go into distress and the baby's heart rate drops or the blood pressure isn't right and they're kind of having to do an emergency C-section, and like you feel like your body is doing this to your baby, try to relax. Try to not put it on yourself. Don't blame yourself. Like, it's not your fault. This is not in your control. Take it for what it is. Keep moving, keep pressing, keep doing it, because you can, you will, and eventually that baby's going to be here and everything's going to be okay. So labor and delivery is like the worst experience I've ever had in my life. So just keep that in mind. Try not to hold yourself too tight to your expectations. Try not to get too wrapped up in what you think you ought to be able to do. Try to focus on making sure that you get from point A to point B. As long as you get there, you did it. You did it. So congratulations. Thanks again for watching. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. If you like this, hit that like button for me. YouTube loves that stuff. I never thought it mattered. I still don't think it matters, but they like that and it helps the channel, so I would really appreciate it if you did that. If you want to see more videos, you kind of like what's going on here, I've got plenty more for labor and delivery alone, and then we're going to do how-tos and all kinds of stuff. I really want to go into like products that are just good. I'm really into design, so anything that just works flawlessly, you're going to hear about it and you're going to know. So thanks again. I hope you guys have a good one, and we'll catch you next time.